I watched my uncle's face drain of color when the lawyer revealed I'd inherited everything. But what he didn't know was that I'd already made it untouchable. The day my uncle tried to take my grandparents' $2.3 million estate, he had no idea I'd already moved every single asset beyond his reach. I was 22 years old, fresh out of college, and I was about to teach my family the most expensive lesson of their lives. But to understand how I pulled this off, we need to go back 2 years, to the day I discovered what my family was really planning. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and my grandparents, Robert and Alina, raised me. My parents died in a car accident when I was 7, and while my uncle Brad, my dad's older brother, was technically supposed to be my guardian, he didn't want that responsibility. So Grandma and Grandpa took me in. They weren't wealthy back then. Grandpa was a high school teacher, Grandma was a nurse, but they gave me everything that mattered. I'm telling you this because you need to understand, I wasn't some spoiled trust fund kid. I mowed lawns, I had a scholarship to State University. I worked 2 part-time jobs through college. The estate we're talking about, that didn't even exist until I was 19. That's when Grandpa's little tech investment, 1,000 shares in some startup he'd bought in the 90s for basically nothing, suddenly became worth $1.8 million when the company went public. Add that to their paid-off house worth $450,000, their savings, Grandpa's pension, and overnight, my grandparents went from comfortable to wealthy. They were 76 and 74 years old, and that's when Uncle Brad suddenly remembered he had family. What he did next makes my blood boil to this day. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos before we dive deeper. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Uncle Brad lives in Connecticut. He's a pharmaceutical sales manager, does well for himself, or so he claims. After my parents died, he visited exactly 3 times in 15 years. No birthday cards, no Christmas calls, nothing. But 2 months after Grandpa's windfall hit the news, small local paper ran a feel-good story about retired teacher strikes it rich. Brad showed up at Sunday dinner with his wife, Cheryl, and their 2 kids I'd never met. Dad, it's been too long. The kids have been asking about Grandpa. Complete lies. Those kids didn't even know my grandparents existed. At first, Grandma and Grandpa were just happy. They'd always wanted a closer relationship with Brad. They were getting older, and here was their son, seemingly wanting to reconnect. I was away at college, 3 hours away, so I only heard about these visits secondhand. But during Thanksgiving break of my junior year, I saw what was really happening. And what I overheard that night changed everything. Thanksgiving 2021. I'd driven home Wednesday night planning to help Grandma with the cooking. Around 11 p.m., I came downstairs to get water, and I heard voices in Grandpa's study. The door was cracked. It was Brad and Cheryl, and they were arguing. Cheryl was saying, "We can't wait until they're both gone, Brad. Your father is 78 years old. What if he lives another 15 years? We need that money now. The house in Greenwich isn't going to pay for itself." And Brad said, "I will never forget this, I know. That's why we need to convince them to name me financial power of attorney. Once I have control of the accounts, we can start redirecting things." Redirecting, that's the word he used. Not borrowing, not asking for help, redirecting. My uncle was planning to financially exploit his own elderly parents. I stood in that hallway for 20 minutes listening to them plan in detail, and that's when I made my decision. I didn't confront them. I didn't tell my grandparents, not yet, because I knew that if I went in there emotional and accusatory, Brad would just deny everything, and my grandparents would be caught in the middle, not knowing who to believe. No, I needed to be smart. I needed evidence, a plan, and most importantly, I needed to learn everything about estate planning, trusts, and elder financial abuse. I spent the next 3 months becoming an expert. I talked to the pre-law advisor at my university. I found online resources. I even cold called an estate planning attorney in my college town and begged for a free consultation as a student interested in the field. Attorney named Margaret Chen, and she was incredible. When I explained the situation hypothetically, she didn't just give me advice. She gave me a roadmap. Margaret told me 3 things that would save my grandparents' entire estate. First, a revocable living trust. If my grandparents transferred their assets into a properly structured trust, they'd maintain complete control during their lifetime, but the assets would pass automatically to beneficiaries without going through probate. More importantly, they could name a successor trustee, someone they trusted, to manage everything if they became incapacitated. Second, durable power of attorney documents that were specific and limited. Not the broad, sweeping powers Brad was trying to get, but narrow authorities that couldn't be abused. Third, document everything, every conversation, every visit, every request. Because if this went to court and Margaret said it might, I'd need proof of Brad's intentions. So that's what I did. Over winter break and into spring semester, I started recording family dinners on my phone. Legally, in our state, only one party needs to consent to recording. I saved voicemails. I screenshot texts, and in March, Brad made his move. He didn't ask for power of attorney. Oh no, what he asked for was so much worse. March 14th, 2022. I got a panicked call from Grandma. She was crying. She said Brad had visited that afternoon with financial advisors from some wealth management company, and they'd spent 3 hours trying to convince her and Grandpa to invest $1.2 million, basically their entire liquid assets, into something called a guaranteed income annuity. Now, some annuities are legitimate products, but this one. When I looked up the company, it was one of those predatory firms that targets the elderly with high-fee products that lock up their money and pay massive commissions to salespeople. And Brad, he'd somehow become a licensed advisor with this company 2 months earlier. He was going to earn a $72,000 commission by selling his own parents a garbage financial product that would trap their money and generate almost no real return. Grandma said they hadn't signed anything, but Brad was coming back in 2 days with final paperwork, and he was being very pushy, saying things like, "Dad, you're not getting any younger. You need professional management. You trust me, don't you?" That night, I drove home. 3 hours, left at 9 p.m., got there at midnight. And the next morning, I sat down with my grandparents and told them everything. Their reaction, not what I expected. Grandpa cried. This strong, proud man who'd taught high school history for 35 years, who'd served in Vietnam, who'd raised me when no one else would, he cried. Because his own son, his firstborn, saw him as nothing but a bank account. Grandma was angry, furious. She wanted to call Brad right then and tell him never to come back. But I said, wait, let me help you do this properly. Let's not just protect you from Brad. Let's protect you from anyone who might try this, and let's make sure that when you're gone, everything goes exactly where you want it to go. That weekend, we met with a real estate planning attorney. Not Margaret, she was too far away, but someone she'd referred us to. His name was James Porter, and he'd been doing this for 30 years. Over the next 6 weeks, we built a fortress. Step 1. Created the Mitchell Family Revocable Living Trust. Every asset went into it. The house. The investment accounts. The stock portfolio. Everything. Robert and Alina were co-trustees with complete control. Upon their death or incapacitation, I would become successor trustee. Step 2. New financial power of attorney documents, limited in scope, requiring 2 signatures for any transaction over $5,000 and specifically excluding Brad from ever being granted authority. Step 3. Updated healthcare directives and living wills, naming me as healthcare proxy. Step 4. Changed beneficiaries on all insurance policies and retirement accounts to the trust. The whole process took 6 weeks and cost about $4,500 in legal fees. My grandparents paid $3,000, and I paid the rest from money I'd saved working summers. Best investment I ever made. Because what happened when Brad found out, that's when things got ugly. May 2022. I'd graduated, bachelor's degree in finance, graduated summa cum laude. My grandparents hosted a small party, about 20 people, mostly their friends, a few of my college friends who'd driven in. Brad showed up uninvited. He walked into the backyard where we were celebrating, and he was off, agitated. He made a beeline for Grandpa and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Dad, we need to talk." Now, inside, I followed them in. Brad spun around and said, "This is private, Sarah," and Grandpa said, "She stays. Whatever you have to say, she can hear." That's when Brad exploded. Turns out he'd tried to get information from Grandpa's brokerage account. He'd somehow got the account number, and they'd told him he wasn't authorized. That's when he realized he'd been locked out. "What did you do? Did you change your accounts? Did she tell you to do that?" He was pointing at me. "She's poisoning you against your own son. I'm trying to help you, and she's manipulating you because she wants your money." I stayed calm. I said, "Brad, I don't want their money. I want them to be safe. Safe from bad financial products. Safe from people who see them as targets. Safe from family members who would exploit them." And then I played him the recording, the Thanksgiving conversation, him and Cheryl discussing how to get power of attorney, how to redirect funds, all of it. I played it right there on my phone in front of Grandpa, the look on Brad's face, pure panic. But what he said next, that's when I knew we'd need that trust. Brad went nuclear. He screamed that I'd illegally recorded him, that I'd manipulated elderly people, that he was going to sue me, sue them, sue everyone. He claimed Grandpa had dementia. He didn't. He'd been evaluated by his doctor as cognitively sharp, and that the trust was invalid because he'd been unduly influenced. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Fine. You want to play hardball. When you die, Dad, I'm challenging this in court. I'm your son." I'm entitled to half of everything by law, and no piece of paper Sarah cooked up is going to change that. And he stormed out. Now, legally, he was wrong. In most states, including ours, children have no automatic inheritance rights if a parent has a valid will or trust, but he could still contest it. He could tie everything up in probate court for years. He could force us to spend tens of thousands in legal fees. That's when James, our attorney, suggested something brilliant. He said add a no-contest clause and fund the trust with a small inheritance for Brad, just enough to make the clause enforceable. A no-contest clause says, if you challenge this trust and lose, you forfeit your inheritance entirely. We added it, and we put $25,000 into a separate account designated for Brad. Not because he deserved it, but because it made the clause legally airtight. If he challenged the trust and lost, he'd get nothing. If he accepted it, he'd get $25,000. His choice. We thought that would be the end of it. We were wrong. July 2023, 14 months later. Grandpa had a stroke. He survived, but he was weakened, couldn't manage the finances anymore. Under the terms of the trust, I stepped in as co-trustee alongside Grandma. Brad found out, someone at the hospital must have told him, and he pounced. He filed an emergency petition in probate court claiming Grandpa was incompetent. I was financially abusing them, and he should be appointed guardian and conservator. He wanted full control. It was a nightmare, court hearings, depositions. We had to bring in Grandpa's doctors to testify about his mental capacity. We had to show all the financial records proving I hadn't taken a single penny. In fact, I'd been paying for things out of my own pocket. But here's where the trust saved everything. Because the assets were in the trust, not in Grandpa's individual name, the probate court had no jurisdiction over them. Brad was essentially suing for control of assets the court couldn't touch. The judge saw through it immediately. She asked Brad's attorney what's the basis for this petition, and when they couldn't point to any actual evidence of abuse, just Brad's accusations, she dismissed it, with prejudice, meaning he couldn't file again. And then she sanctioned him, made him pay $8,000 of our legal fees for filing a frivolous lawsuit. But the story doesn't end there. October 2024. Grandpa passed away, peacefully at home with Grandma and me holding his hands. He was 80 years old. Because everything was in the trust, there was no probate, no public filing, no opportunity for Brad to contest anything. The assets transferred to Grandma seamlessly. I continued as co-trustee to help her manage things, and that $25,000 for Brad, Grandma and I discussed it. We had the option to withhold it since he'd challenged the trust. But Grandma said, give it to him. Let this be done. So I did. I had the attorney send him a check with a letter explaining this was his full inheritance under the terms of the trust and that any further contact should go through the attorney. He cashed it, and we haven't heard from him since. Today, Grandma is 79. She's healthy, sharp, and still living in the house. I visit every weekend. I handle the bills and investments, everything transparently, everything documented. When she passes, the trust specifies that the house goes to me, and the remaining assets are split between a scholarship fund in my parents' names and a charity Grandma chose. The total estate is now worth about $2.6 million. It's grown because we invested wisely and avoided Brad's predatory annuity scheme. So what did I learn from all this? 3 things. 1, family doesn't mean someone has your best interests at heart. Trust but verify, especially with money. 2, estate planning isn't just for the wealthy. If you have anything worth protecting, a house, savings, sentimental items, you need a plan. Don't leave your loved ones vulnerable. 3, document everything. The recordings, the emails, the financial records, all of that protected us when Brad tried to twist the truth in court. If you're in a situation like this, if you have elderly relatives and you're worried about their safety, please talk to an estate planning attorney. It cost us less than $5,000 to protect $2.3 million. Best investment ever. And if you're the Brad in this story, if you're eyeing your parents' assets like they're your retirement plan, do better. Because the Sarahs of the world are watching, and we're one step ahead of you. Thanks for watching. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is my story. Oh, and one more thing about Brad that I couldn't include in court documents. What we discovered about where he was really getting his money from. But that's a story for another time.